You know, for thousands of years, there's been one story that has absolutely captivated humanity. A giant flood covering the entire planet, one family chosen to survive, and a single boat built to save every living creature. It is the ultimate story of destruction and a second chance.
But here's the billion-dollar question. Could it be more than just a story? I mean, is it possible? That's the question that has driven people to the most remote corners of the globe, and it's a question that puts faith right up against geology and ancient texts against modern science. So, let's get into it. We are going to look at the modern-day hunt for the Ark, some of the unbelievable hoaxes it's inspired, and dig into the huge scientific and theological questions that keep this story so powerful and so controversial, even today. Our investigation starts on the treacherous, icy slopes of Mount Ararat in what is now Turkey. This is the traditional landing spot for the Ark, and for more than a century, it's been ground zero for explorers, believers, and adventurers of all stripes. And believe me, the search has been relentless. It really kicks into high gear in the 50s when a French industrialist makes this incredible claim. A few years later, a bizarre boat-shaped outline is spotted from the air. Fast forward to the 80s, and you have an actual astronaut, a man who walked on the moon, leading expeditions up this mountain. And the claims, well, they just keep coming, right into our own century. I mean, this quote from astronaut James Irwin just says it all, doesn't it? He literally walked on the moon, and yet he found searching for the Ark on Mount Ararat to be an even bigger challenge. It just perfectly captures the insane difficulty and the frustrating, almost mythical nature of this whole quest.
Irwin's words really highlight the struggle, but some people, like that French industrialist Fernand Navarra, claimed they actually found something. So let's take a closer look at what is probably the most famous piece of supposed evidence ever brought down from that mountain. And here, you can see the central conflict in a nutshell. Navarra's claim was a bombshell, a piece of wood that was 5,000 years old. It looked like the smoking gun everyone was searching for. But then science got involved. Multiple independent labs ran radiocarbon dating tests, and they all came back with a much, much younger age, placing the wood somewhere in the Middle Ages, not the biblical era.
You know, this intense desire for proof doesn't just lead to questionable claims. Sometimes it swings the door wide open for straight-up deception. And back in 1993, one of the wildest hoaxes you can imagine played out in front of millions of people on national TV.
So get this guy George Jamal basically started it as a joke to see how gullible people were. He cooks up this dramatic story about finding the Ark, complete with a dead friend whose name, get this, was Alice Bulgishian. He even made his proof by baking a piece of wood in teriyaki sauce. And the punchline? He becomes the star witness on a primetime CBS special. He fooled everybody. Later, he exposed the whole thing just to show how badly the producers wanted to believe his story.
It's just incredible. The TV producers claim they did exhaustive research, but they totally missed that his friend's name was basically a practical joke. They called him a credible eyewitness, but never bothered to check if he'd even been to Turkey. And they presented his teriyaki-soaked plank as powerful evidence, without running a single scientific test. It's a classic case of seeing what you want to see.
Okay, so beyond the physical hunt for the Ark and the hoaxes it inspires, a literal reading of the story runs into a completely different set of problems, challenges that come from the world of science and just plain old logistics. Let's just start with this number. 2 million. And that's a conservative estimate of the number of animal species on Earth. Now, the Bible says Noah had to take 2 of every unclean animal and 7 pairs of every clean animal. Just try to wrap your head around the sheer scale of that job. It's mind-boggling. And from there, the questions just keep piling up. Where do you even put them all? How could you possibly store enough food for a year and deal with all the waste? And how do you keep the lions from eating the gazelles? Then you get to the physics problems. Scientists point out there just isn't enough water in our planet's system to cover Mount Everest. And if there were, the heat released from that much rain would literally boil the oceans. And finally, how on earth did the polar bears and penguins get from Turkey to the poles? These are the really tough questions skeptics raise. What's so fascinating, though, is how both sides can look at the exact same piece of evidence and see totally different things. A great example, marine fossils on top of mountains. For a flood geologist, that's slam-dunk proof the oceans once covered everything. But for a mainstream geologist, it's clear evidence of plate tectonics, a slow process that pushes ancient seabeds up over millions of years. It's a fundamental disagreement about the very history of our planet. For a lot of believers, though, all of these scientific objections completely miss the point. The argument really just boils down to faith. I mean, if you believe in an all-powerful God who created the entire universe from nothing, then the logistics of a global flood, well, they aren't really obstacles at all. They're just the details of a miracle.
And this really gets us to the heart of the whole thing. This debate isn't just about bits of wood and geology. It's about how we read these ancient stories and what we believe their purpose really is.
You see, the story of Noah isn't actually unique. It's part of a global pattern that scholars call the flood myth. From ancient Greece to Mesopotamia to the Americas, cultures all over the world, many that had zero contact with each other, told these strikingly similar stories of a massive, world-ending flood sent by the gods. In fact, the biblical story has an uncanny resemblance to a much, much older story, the Mesopotamian Epic of Gilgamesh. It predates the Bible by thousands of years, and that suggests to a lot of scholars that the story of Noah might actually be the Hebrew version of a powerful, ancient myth that was passed down for generations. But even within Christianity, there's a really deep debate about this. For many, the case is closed because of the words of Jesus himself. In the New Testament, Jesus refers to the days of Noah as a real historical event. So for believers who take the Bible literally, that's the ultimate confirmation. End of story.
But other Christians see it very differently. They point out that Jesus often used parables, fictional stories, and well-known tales from his culture to teach deeper spiritual truths. So from that perspective, when he mentioned Noah, it wasn't a historical endorsement. It was just him using a powerful, familiar story to make a point about something else.
So in the end, we're left with this question. Whether you see it as literal history, a profound allegory, or a myth passed down through the ages, the story of the Ark, it lasts. It speaks to our deepest fears about catastrophe and, at the same time, our greatest hopes for renewal and a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we're still searching for it.